So I'd like to give the floor to Church Roberts. He's going to give an update on a conservation grant project. That was also, I believe, Nicole, you were a liaison to this as well. And the purpose of this is to give us a presentation on update of a previous conservation grant recipient, providing their project updates, results, and outcomes from the project. And this relates to public engagement, priority action one, to promote environmental literacy, awareness, and stewardship through expanded education and engagement opportunities for the general public. So with that, Church, you're welcome to begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Nicole, for helping put this together. I'm not a very pleasant person to be around when I'm not feeling well, so I appreciate all the help. In 2023, I received a grant as Church Environmental to conduct a drone survey over 2 rookeries in the Caloosahatchee River. I did these same surveys in 2018 and 2019. The purpose, part of the purpose was to determine the effectiveness of using drones and then also the safety factor compared to historic methods for doing rookery counts, which was using fixed airplanes. The funding amount mentioned there, it was a $1,200 grant. Total cost was $2,650. For this drone survey, I partnered with Earth Tech Environmental. They provided the boat and boat operator. And I think we can go to the next slide. So these are the 2 rookeries that have been surveyed for those 3 years. If you can see I-75 and Manatee Sign Island, that's right where the Orange River comes out into the Caloosahatchee River. Thank you. And then the other one is to the west of I-75, the Lenore Island, which is a 1.25 acre island also in the Caloosahatchee River. So you can go to the next slide. Again, that photo is from an earlier drone survey. I will say this, I had met with Jennifer back in, I think, 2017, 2018 to ask about grant ideas. So she had mentioned they had this drone and that if I could get my operator permit, then I could, possibly apply for the grants and do the surveys. And so I got my operations permit. I flew the drone. I flew it one time at a church parking lot. And then I was going to go out with Pete Quash just to kind of test it from his boat. Well, I get a call from Jennifer. It says, "Hey, we're coming down. We're bringing the news press." And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm not ready for this." But fortunately, that all worked out well. And so for this survey in 2022, the UAV height ranged from 60 to 80 feet. And that had actually been a little bit higher than I had done in previous years. This talks about the flight speed going, it's a very slow, you just set it up, go about 5 to 10 miles an hour, do a single pass to cover the entire Rookery Island. And then once I get the video, I basically pause it and I create a mosaic of photographs with the nest and then identify and do the nest counts from there. And so this survey was conducted in May 6th of 2022. So next slide. So this is a running summary of the 3 surveys. At Lenore Island, you can see that wood storks have dominated the rookery, ranging from a low of 249 in 2019 to a high of 420 in 2018. I do wonder now if this is actually the largest wood stork rookery in Lee County. I know Corkscrew Audubon had been a big competition, but it's just not as productive as it historically was. And so it would be interesting to understand from a regional perspective where our active rookeries are and what the nest counts are. At the Lenore Island, for the first year, there were actually brown pelicans, but that was the only year that we've had those. And so the nest counts appeared high, appeared consistent with previous nest counts in 2018. At Manatee Sign Island, the predominant bird species are great egrets. There's also been great blue herons out there, but pretty much dominated by great egrets. And again, it was a successful breeding year in 2022. I'm not actually counting the fledglings, I'm just counting the nest. So next slide. Yeah, so the ability to use the drone, I mean, if you think about if you use a fixed airplane, you have to go to the airport, then you have to fly to the site with these drones. They're just so accessible to any site. If you have a boat, you can get right there to the site, or you can launch it from adjacent properties. It really is user friendly to do the surveys. And again, here about the separation between the top of the nest height in the mangroves to where the drone was flown was about a 30-foot separation. I've done that closer, ranging to 20 to 25 feet. For both from 20 to 30 feet separation, I've never identified any uh, bird harassments. No birds were jumping out of their nest or anything. They all seem to be passively accepting that the drone is flying overhead. And I also would be interested in future surveys because, like, I know in 2018 with Pete Quasius, we did the surveys later in the afternoon. He's not an early person. And this time I did them earlier in the morning, and there was a little bit of difficulty with the sunlight and identifying the different bird species. So I do think there's an optimum time of day that should be identified to fly the drones. And again, the future separation that I've identified is keeping the drone roughly 20 to 25 feet above the nest, should not startle the breeding birds. And next slide. So that's just a picture of Lenore Island. And Nicole, I don't know if you wanted to play the video. So we have videos from both islands, and we can just watch those, and you can see what it is that I looked at to do the nest counts. Yeah, and this is Lenore Island. This isn't Manatee Sign, but you can see the wood storks nesting there, and there we go. So again, what I do is, like, I would freeze a shot right there and then do a nest count and then freeze a shot for another mosaic to create the whole panel. And the whole river in this area is really shallow, except for you have the navigation channel. And as we're watching this, one thing I'd like to mention is I was working on another project in eastern Collier County that had a rookery, but there's just questionable whether or not, as a consultant, you can use a drone to fly over and do the nest counts. So I think coordination needs to occur with the Fish and Wildlife Commission to get some consistency in how consultants can use drones to conduct these types of surveys. I think that's a sample of what I did.
Pull the PowerPoint up too. All right, great. Can everybody see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Great. So, Church, what we were doing with this particular presentation was there were a couple different conservation grants that had concluded in September, yours being among those. And we wanted to share the outcomes from a few of the others. And then we had time for questions at the very end or discussion. And you all may have some questions for Church. And so if you don't mind being geared up for that for questions afterwards. Oh, it looks like Jennifer has a question now.
Well, I only was suggesting that maybe if we could go back to that recommendation slide. I'm not sure we got through. I mean, I heard about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I was wondering, Church, if you might go through some of these other recommendations as well.
Well, the other recommendations, I'm comfortable now, having done these surveys 3 different years, with a 20 to 25 foot separation from the drone and the nest height. And again, I did find it more beneficial to have done an early afternoon surveys just because of the sunlight. And so a comparison of that for future surveys would be beneficial. And then an added recommendation would be that we need to coordinate with the Fish and Wildlife Commission. You know, I would like to understand what all the rookeries are being surveyed, what are the nest counts, and I just can't seem to find a universal library for all of that information. And I think now with everybody having drones and stuff like that, it would be timely to meet with the commission to discuss operating in rookeries.
Anybody else have any other questions or discussion for Church? We can move on to the other ones afterwards.
Yeah,
Hey, go ahead.
yeah, Tom. Yeah, the Water Management District do rookery surveys too. At least South Florida does. So you might want to talk to them as well.
Yeah, I'm aware that they do them, and Fish and Wildlife Commission does them. Yeah, I can probably reach out to somebody to see, where they keep all this data.
Church, I'm wondering if you had a specific flight plan over the islands, because I know some of these drones, they have like GPS tracking, so you can like put breadcrumbs to make sure that you kind of maximize drone time in the air. Do you like run transects or just do like a spiral? Or I know they're oddly shaped, so it's kind of hard to do that, but just wondering what your
Yeah,
method was.
it's transects.
Okay.
Basically, generally east-west, because that's the orientation of the river and the
Mhm.
length of, say, Lenore Island. But just transects in order to cover video-wise the entire island, the entire rookery. And then you create the mosaic of photos to do the nest counts once you're back at the office.
Cool. Very
And
nice.
there is I don't do a predetermined flight path. I just, fly the rookery from the boat, and as best I can see it, and it generally covers the entire thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Church? All right, I guess we can move on. Thanks again.
Okay, as I was starting to mention, so basically, this Churches is one of the conservation grants that closed out at mid-September, and we thought that it was really interesting stuff and that you all would like to hear about it. And it sounds like everyone did, and we really thought it was cool, some of the outcomes that could be shared with the group, because we know that we do have some other people that are working on community science projects and also bird monitoring. So that as we try to do in these meetings, we'll continue to bring you outcomes from conservation grants that have closed. The last meeting we featured some of those cleanups that Jennifer had mentioned. We featured some of the outcomes from those, so that was one of them. And then there were a few others that closed out in September that we wanted to bring you a report out on. These wouldn't be full presentations, so we just wanted to give you some updates on some of these smaller conservation grants. Maybe smaller in scale, but still very large impact. So one of the other conservation grants from the previous year was educational signage and habitat restoration for Cape Coral Wildlife Trust. And so in their initial application, they were proposing to install education signage at 18 properties on gopher tortoises and boring owls, and to plant native grasses and flowers. And so the CHNEP had brought these to the CAC for discussion. CAC agreed. So we did fund that project last year for $3,000. The total cost of the project was around $6,000. So the signs were produced. And photos of the installed complete signs were sent to the CHNEP, and we just wanted to share that with you all. So here's a couple photos of those and some of the plantings you can see behind the sign in that top photo. So volunteers spent around 135 to 170 hours a month on the care, maintenance, and monitoring and education at Cape Coral Wildlife Trust site. So this is definitely a worthwhile investment to aid a partner in some big work that they're doing. They did complete native plantings. They installed berms and artificial burrows that have had much success in attracting baby gopher tortoises and owls, which is really cool. This was included in that final deliverable report that Jennifer had mentioned. That was what we paid out on. And they've produced starter burrow brochures to educate citizens on being able to have burrowing owls in their own yards. Again, furthering that science communication, which we think is really important. So happy to report out the success on that one. One of the others was the Peterson Preserve pine restoration. And so this was brought to us, I think Tom Palmer actually worked with a local group, and the project was for habitat restoration of an old upland citrus grove on Lake Annie in Polk County. The funding requested was $3,000. The total cost of the project was almost $12,000. So some of the deliverables produced, and this was part of the discussion from the CAC, they asked that CHNEP logo be added to the sign, and that the memo that was sent to us to close it out included photos of the completed signs as well as photos of the native plantings that were done. And so happy to report out that all of that was completed. There's some great action shots down there too, and a photo of the sign. So restoration and improvements to over 9,000 square feet of that old citrus grove on Lake Annie through invasives removal and planting of almost 2,000 native grasses and 588 wildflowers. Which helps, again, these native plantings help to remove pollutants from Peace River watershed, hopefully capturing some of that drain off before it reaches the waterway. And they created a wildlife brush pile and installed pine snags, which is helpful for habitat for raptors and other birds. And they marked and recorded gopher tortoise burrows and installed gopher tortoise educational signage again. So it was a little bit of restoration, a little bit of education, which is really exciting. And actually, there's one other cleanup, and this may be a future presentation as well, but we just wanted to give you an update. So there were a lot of cleanups, as Jennifer mentioned last year, following Hurricane Ian. This was a cleanup where we partnered with Keep Charlotte Beautiful on the International Coastal Cleanup and the Great American Cleanup. They were focused on waterways this previous year. And so they were working with Ocean Conservancy to not only do the cleanup, but also record the amount of trash that was cleaned up. And so that goes to a big community science online. If you all visit Ocean Conservancy, they actually have report stats from international coastal cleanups from every year, which is really exciting. So it makes it not just a cleanup, but a community science event. So they requested $4,400 from CHNEP. Total project cost was close to $7,000. And then they sent over a technical memo, which included all of those following stats: event dates, volunteer hours, weight of debris collected. And so the results from that. So again, they did several cleanups on this. A few of the cleanups, CHNEP staff participated in them, local citizens and lots of other NGOs. They removed over 2,000 pounds of trash, debris from the mangroves along Charlotte Harbor West Wall. So one of the unique things that Hurricane Ian did in a lot of these areas is there was a lot of styrofoam debris. And some of the counties had contractors to pick up like the really big items out of the water, but the styrofoam debris was not. And walking into the mangroves and picking things out by hand is not something that a big contractor is going to do. So this required a lot of help from the community. And so when you think about that, that's 2,000 pounds of styrofoam that was removed, which is a lot. And some derelict fishing gear. There was a lot of that washed in the mangroves because, again, they wanted to capture that styrofoam before it broke apart into smaller and smaller pieces and couldn't be cleaned up. So the Great American, so that was at a separate cleanup. And then there was the Great American Cleanup in June. 58 volunteers collected over 600 pounds of debris. And then again, the final cleanup, 151 volunteers collected 850 pounds of debris across 8 locations in Charlotte County. So overall, we felt like this was a really successful investment and partnership. And there was a lot of others contributing time and some other materials and things like that. So just wanted to give you guys a report out on that. And they may be giving us a presentation at a future meeting as well, because I think it is really cool to see this and the community effort. So with that, we just wanted to give you guys some of the updates on those, but happy to answer any questions as I can as those on those grants that closed out, or if you all had any further questions for church.
All right, great. Thank you. I'm really familiar with that Cape Coral Wildlife Trust. They had this, Cape Coral is a pre-platted community, so starting in the late 1950s, 20 years, canals and roadways were put in. So the idea of just buying up contiguous quarter-acre lots to provide, habitat for wildlife like the burrowing owls and the gopher tortoises is really cool. They recently approached our environmental staff with their parks department to come up with a habitat management plan for those lots. So that's why they're getting slash pines and saw palmettos and things like that for the gopher tortoise habitat, and trying to find the best way to manage the lots that have a lot of owls on them. So that's really cool. But is there any other comments regarding these previous grants? So you unmute and
You
go
know,
ahead.
since we have a little extra time too, it would be great to get input from you all. Our next speaker isn't till 10:30, so I'm thinking, we could use this time to kind of brainstorm together. Do you all see any opportunities? Are you hearing anything in your communities about projects that NGOs are working on, or that community groups of any kind are working on that would, enhance implementation of the CCMP? It can be restoring waterways. It can be doing cleanups to improve water quality. It can be doing research on either of those things. It can be fish, wildlife, and habitat, like with these restoration projects that we just went through. But I just wondered if we could use the extra few minutes we have here to kind of brainstorm and hear if you have any input about people we should maybe approach to offer that they consider applying. Because like you said, I mean, you're working with that group. Others are probably working with other groups. Some of the groups are actually on the line, Lemon Bay Conservancy. So, we would love to hear about any projects that you see that could use some additional funding support.
So I have a question, Jennifer. I've been helping Sea and Shoreline and Dave Seeley out on planting submerged aquatic vegetation in the Caloosahatchee River. And, I know DEP has the Living Shoreline program, but is there some other grant opportunity, and let's just focus on the Caloosahatchee River, for the folks living along the river that they could do that would enhance the water quality of the river? Or is there a partnership that needs to be done, say, with DEP and CHNEP to help promote, grants and opportunities for environmental benefits?
We had done a project a while back, a citizen seagrass gardening project, where we worked with homeowners to do installations behind their home where they would, essentially help us care for the installation, take a little ownership over it as an extension of their yard, their connection of with the waterfront. And right now, and Nicole, maybe you can speak to this, I believe we have a project waiting in the wings that we're just waiting for one of our federal grants to come through to help fund a bigger project. Maybe you could speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, we are partnering with Angler Action Foundation on a exploring basically SAV restoration and submerged aquatic vegetation, and specifically looking at tape grass in stormwater canals. It is proliferating in there, and it could really be beneficial to water quality. So rather than getting rid of it, helping counties to understand the benefits of leaving it there, and maybe even installing it in other places where it could be successful. And so this would be like a little pilot research study where they would install, I think it's I'm going to get the name of the canal wrong, but it was like Powell Creek Canal or something that the county had selected that they said this is ideal. There's not a lot of navigation in this canal. There's no navigation in this canal right now. And doing a little SAV restoration and then doing some monitoring, extensive monitoring actually pre and post and during in the sediment and in the water column to see how beneficial that is. And then if there are benefits, they're actually coordinating with DEP to maybe quantify that as a best management practice and then get credits for that down the road, which would be really beneficial. So that's a project that we have waiting in the wings once our federal funding comes in.
Yeah, and thanks, Nicole. And that's kind of what I was asking about. But you asked about the monies. I mean, these things could have a tremendous lift for TMDLs and basin management action plans that if we could quantify the cost benefit, then we could really incentivize people to go out and do these plantings
Yes,
because
we
it is
agree.
Right.
successful. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
successful. There is a process to do it. It does take time, but the benefit would be huge.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, maybe like 4 years ago, we identified that as one of the reasons why seagrass restoration wasn't happening more was because there was no credits being awarded when counties and cities invested in those types of projects. So we actually had funded FGCU to do with Dr. James Douglas to do some studies to try to quantify those water quality benefits. And they're still working on that project, but to Nicole's point, now we're also engaging other partners to try to fix that policy issue because we think that would, having it be listed and awarded credit would certainly stimulate more seagrass restoration projects. And I think I saw a hand up.
Yeah, Jane, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just briefly wanted to tell you about, we adopted the CHNEP oyster gardening program. We've expanded it now to something called One Dock at a Time. But what we've also done is join another group called the VOG Alliance. So we're actually communicating with people from Tampa, Sarasota, estuaries programs, Baywatch programs, and Fish and Wildlife. And what we're doing is we're actually coordinating a new paper. So we're actually looking at individual ownership of your dock and creating habitats. Now, it's going to take a while, but we've actually started the research program, and it's with the VOG Alliance, which is all managed up in Sarasota. But once we've actually got this paper, it will be a template. And it was all because of CHNEP, but thanks. But basically what we're doing is we're taking a recycled oyster shell from a restaurant. So we're demonstrating a recycle, taking out of the landfill, we're curing them, we're stringing them, we're making public engagement into their own individual environmental stewardship, rather than these mass doing living walls and dumping tons of oyster shells on the bank. It isn't involving an individual. So we're just taking it one dock at a time.
That's a good approach. Is there any other comments?
Carrie, I had one thing that reminded me of for this group too, for people bringing conservation grants. One of the things, and I think that this, the vertical oyster gardening is a really good project to be pointing people to, because there was a lot of interest in improving water quality, and I think there was some interest. We've heard groups over the years like talk about doing artificial reef restorations and things like that, and now the DEP has provided some guidance on what types of artificial habitats were going to require permits, and they were, formulating some guidelines. And so if you do have anybody, and I think the vertical oyster gardens are a good example of those, that because it is just using the wire, it's not putting more plastic in the water or anything like that, that we will be directing people to. But if you do hear anybody talking about installing artificial reefs, there's now DEP guidance for those mini reefs, and we have copies of that too. Because we want to make sure, we're improving water quality, but also doing it in a way that doesn't, add anything to the environment. And so I think the vertical oyster garden programs are a really good example of something that that is doing that. So if it, you know, I've heard, and we've had people ask for conservation grants in the past for artificial reefs, and we said, hey, you know, we know that DEP is formulating an opinion on this, and they finally have. So we said, hey, we're holding off on any funding, anything like that. But if you do hear anybody, you can send them to us, or you can send them to DEP for more information. So I just wanted to make that note really quick.
Great, thank you.